Francis, I know that you are a great specialist of Marcel Duchamp for years and Surrealism and Dada. And so you're organizing this auction at Phillips. Where did you find all the lots?
Where did I find them?
Yes?
Uh, so many different places. Every single lot comes from a different source. So it's, there are over 100 of them. So I can't answer that question. Is it 100 lots, 100 different places? I
Wow.
didn't get them from the, oh, I have to shut this. I didn't get them from the same place. So,
Yeah, so it's from your different relation all over the years, right?
well, many of the artists who showed at my gallery, if they showed a specific work that I liked, I would buy it from them.
Uh,
And quite a few come from that source, like the Pamela Joseph, the Kathleen Gillia, the Mike Bidlow, the Pablo Echauran. That's the fountain. What I did not say and what is not actually said in any of the Phillips literature, and I didn't divulge it to them, that Pablo Echauran is the son of Mata Echauran. And he lives in Rome, and I speak Italian fluently, so I've been to visit him, and we've spent a lot of time together. But I've decided to put these things up at auction because not only do they coincide with the Duchamp retrospective at MoMA, but also I have 3 kids who have no idea really who Marcel Duchamp is. They know, of course, because I've had a life of working on the same artist, but they don't have the same interests I have. So I thought in the future, I need to try to find these works of art new homes where they'll be appreciated. So
I didn't understand that. Everything belonged to you.
not everything. That's why the exhibition is curated by me, but the larger number of works in the exhibition, yes, they do belong to me.
Okay, and the Duchamp ones.
Yeah, the not all of them, but maybe I don't know, 80% of them, 75% of them, yes.
Okay, and what can we say about the market of Marcel Duchamp? Because Marcel Duchamp is above all an idea, a concept.
Well, I tell everyone, I had a gallery for 20 years in New York, and trying to sell works by Duchamp basically is inheriting the system he already set up uh, to make it difficult for these things to find buyers or an appreciative audience. He's part of the problem that caused this. And it's an interesting phenomenon, though, because it's something I believe he was aware of. So issuing replicas, doing posters, books, and all of these things that you end up collecting are things that he had to have known that people in the future would collect. And also in order to collect them, you end up having no choice but to become a connoisseur, like in the old-fashioned days of print collectors. They had to know everything about the different states of the print, how many of them were printed, how available they are, were they made in the artist's lifetime or after. It's all kinds of questions that you now are forced to ask yourself if you want to try to purchase a work by Marcel Duchamp, especially one of those printed or editioned works. I mean, it can go all the way from the ready-mades that were issued by Arturo Schwartz, which are worth millions of dollars, all the way down to a book cover that could be $400 or $500.
I think
So
the record price is still eau de voilette, no? The
the
perfume, the fake
yeah,
perfume.
that's the world record. Yeah, I think it's 11.8 million or something to that effect. Uh, but of course, I tried to describe this once in an essay that I wrote because everyone always compares Duchamp to Picasso, and it's an interesting comparison because after all, Picasso was very influential, especially among his peers. All of Cubism wouldn't have happened the way it did without him. Even Marcel Duchamp was influenced indirectly by Picasso with his early Cubist works. But then all of a sudden, he went so far beyond Picasso that he has more influence today than possibly any other artist of that generation. And maybe, as the English art historians voted in 2005, he's the single most influential artist of the modern era.
Yes,
And
for sure.
if you read, but how does that affect the marketplace? It's rather interesting that it has a kind of reverse effect, because if you think about it, Picasso made one work of art that stylistically is dependent on the work of art that came before it. And part of the purpose of that, not necessarily Picasso's intent when he made these works, but one of the end results are that your clientele, the people who buy your work in the end, then see a reliable product. Because, and Duchamp said that at the end of his life, artists are no longer making works of art, he said, they're just writing checks. Because it's really true, because if you make something that is stylistically dependent on what you just made before, you end up creating a reliable product. It's the same thing as Louis Vuitton, or you think of all the great fashion designers.
Picasso changed of style many times.
Yes, he did, but not so abruptly that you didn't know it was him. There are connections between Cubism.
But from Cubism to Neoclassicism, there's no link.
There is. Of course there is.
From period pink to Cubism, it's difficult too.
Well, it depends on how you think it through. I mean, in Cubist space, you don't put the eyes necessarily both right in the same position on the head. And Picasso took from that a rearrangement of bodily parts that continued all the way to the end of his life. There are connections. They're not obvious. A Cubist painting doesn't look like a Picasso. Well, Guernica does look Cubist, however.
But the thing is that now we have the distance. We saw the whole body of work. But if we were living at this period, I think it would have been difficult to accept, and many people didn't accept the new style of Picasso. But we speak today about Duchamp, and I think Duchamp had a real problem in a way for himself to the art market, but in general, not at all, because he was a real dealer. With Brancusi, with Picabia, he organized an auction, like you are doing today. But you don't signing Rose C'est la Vie, but you are organizing an auction, as Duchamp did in 26 at Hotel Rouault. And he was the dealer of Brancusi because he bought a bunch of things that he exhibited in America. So he was really an art dealer, but he had problem for his work themselves.
No, everybody makes that mistake. They think Duchamp hated the art market. He didn't. He was part of it.
He was really playing.
But he hated it for himself. For his own work.
Which is French, huh?
Oh, is that French? Because
a lot of French. No, not French. I know my accent is very French and very strange, but I think strange.
Ah, okay. Yeah, okay.
So it's very strange that he has this kind of double speed with the art market.
Yes.
For himself, no. For his friends, yes.
Yes. But the thing I was going to say earlier is the reason Picasso and the market exploded with Picasso and just doesn't seem to end is in part because he produced so many works. He was constantly productive, and Duchamp, as we all know, was the opposite. His work is very scarce and rare, and one would assume, if you just think in terms of a market, that what Duchamp produced would be more expensive because it's rarer. Rarer is a definition of what increases a market. But there is a big problem with that over a prolonged period of time. And that's because let's say you own a Marie Therese portrait from 1942. You saw that one sold at auction several years ago for 15 million. Well, you don't want 15 million now. A whole year has gone by, or 2 years have gone by. You want 18 or 20 million or 25 million. So I call that the snowball effect, because you have one object that goes into the market and it just keeps increasing and getting bigger like a snowball. But Duchamp doesn't have that. There's no snowball. There's not one thing there that increases so that you can add something to it to get bigger.
And also, I think rare is good for the market, but when it's too rare, it's not good for
Yes,
the market. And that's exactly,
you're absolutely right. It's the opposite.
yeah. So it's a return effect. It's a back
Yeah.
effect, in fact. And so in the auction, in the catalog, the most expensive estimate is the boîte en valise, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Could you
Now,
speak about the boîte en valise?
uh, do I speak about it? You mean,
No,
oh, can I?
could you, no,
Oh,
could
yeah.
you
Okay.
describe this precise boîte en valise? Because there were several, right?
Yeah. There's an interesting thing about the boîte. I just thought of this. The boîte en valise in its various different forms has different values. And what's interesting is the one that I have that's in the show, the red one, gets the highest amount of money, and you won't believe why. It's because it's red. It's really so stupid. Poor Duchamp, this man who fought against the retinal in art. I read an article recently that a Lucio Fontana that is with cuts in it exactly identical to one that's in green, but another one in red sells for double the amount
Of
because
course.
it's red, which is unbelievable that the color can affect the value of a work of art. I understand how it works for Lucio Fontana, but I don't understand why it works for Duchamp. But
Oh,
it does. It
yeah,
just does.
it works for lipstick, but for Duchamp, it's less
Yeah,
suitable.
that's interesting. Since he put lipstick on to become Rossari.
But what year is your boîte en valise?
There's one produced in the 60s that Jacques Monnier helped assemble and put the things together for it. And interestingly enough, it's red leather, the very material that, Duchamp in the 1940s, because of the war, leather became very scarce. And many of the valises exist without the leather suitcase around it. And by the way, someone just pointed out to me yesterday, it's called boîte à valise, but valise, technically, it translates as suitcase. But what he used is not a suitcase. It's an attaché case. It's different.
The first one that he did for Peggy Guggenheim, I think, was a small suitcase.
Is it really? Because
I think so.
Someone has found
it was
the
a
original.
Sorry, it was a Vuitton suitcase,
Yeah,
and I
yeah.
saw it at Guggenheim in Venice.
So it was
And
an actual.
And she had it under her desk to put her feet on.
Really?
Which is very chic.
Yeah, I'll say.
Yeah, so probably the name comes from that and the fact that it is transportable.
Well, you have a handle on an attaché case too.
Yeah, well, anyway.
Yeah, I don't know what the difference is. I don't know any suitcase quite that small. What could you put in it? You could put a shirt in it. I mean,
yeah,
it's too small to put. I think it must have had a different purpose. I don't know. I actually don't know. But
so it's an edition, right?
Well, yes, because he originally made 300, and the deluxe were the first 20, so you still have 280 left. Now, I know some that were destroyed actually, so there should technically be out there this 280 number, but I have noticed something recently. They are getting rarer and rarer and harder to find. And I don't know whether, the problem was the valise sold, that red valise has sold for over $500,000 at auction. But then the price started going down. And part of the reason it went down is Christie's and Sotheby's in Paris, within a 2-week period, had 3 of them for sale. And that's always a mistake, because what happens are 2 people bid against each other. And yes, the person who didn't gets the other one, but he gets it for less. So the prices go down as a result instead of going up.
Because there were all this collection of Surrealisme and Dada, Paul Desribats, and all of them who had a great collection, right?
Yes, it was certainly, yes. Yeah.
That's because
but now I have noticed they're hard to get, and museums love to buy a valise because you get Duchamp all together in one package.
And that's why he did it.
That's exactly why he did it. The problem with it, however, is display, because what museums worry about is that too much light will strike it over a long period of time. And I suggested to a museum, they didn't do it, and I don't know why, that you can control that now. A viewer can come in the room and the lights can go on. You don't have to have them on 24 hours a day, baking the thing that it's looked at. So I don't know why they just don't do that, but they don't listen to me. Nobody does. My wife doesn't listen to me. So, okay, I can understand why museums won't
that
listen
will be the subject of our next interview.
Yeah.
So what about LHOQ shaved? What's the story of this one?
Well, when Duchamp had his exhibition at the Cordier and Ekstrom Gallery.
Cordier and what?
Cordier and Ekstrom.
I don't know this gallery.
Yeah, well, it's a gallery in New York. Duchamp showed there. His big exhibition in 1966 was there. It was the collection of Mary Sizzler. But for the opening, I know this because I had conversations with Arne Ekstrom. He is the Swedish dealer who owned it. He was in business with Daniel Cordier, the guy in Paris. So they had galleries in both places. Anyway, the New York gallery, when they announced this exhibition, they asked Duchamp if he would design something as an invitation for people to come to the dinner. And everyone assumed he took a pack of playing cards of the Mona Lisa and he glued them to the surface of this paper invitation. And below is printed the word LHOQ, but handwritten is Rasé. He actually hand wrote that because he didn't add the mustache or the goatee. So he, in effect, shaved her. So he wrote, so nobody gets this when they look at it. Printed are the words LHOQ at the bottom, but above it, handwritten is his word Rasé. I love the idea. However, this is something that has not, I don't think it's ever been published. Arne Ekstrom, I said, does this mean only 52 people came to the dinner? Because that's how many cards are in a deck of cards. He said, oh no, we use a canasta deck. Canasta is 104 cards.
Well, so canasta? What is it?
Canasta is a game. I don't know that it's played in France, but it's played with two decks of cards. So you can buy what's called a canasta deck. So you get 104 cards, not 52.
Okay, so there are 140.
There should be. Well, he could not. He's dead now, Arne Ekstrom. He could not remember if they used them all, but he said we needed to buy the canasta deck to get enough.
So how to put an estimate on this lot?
Well, I can tell you I don't own this particular one, and that's a negotiation that probably took place between the owner and Phillips. However, another one is coming up right now. You might have seen at Christie's.
In May?
But they share a very similar estimate, if not the same estimate. I don't know.
And it's a shaved one?
Yeah. Yeah. They also have an LHOQ for the Pierre de Massot exhibition. And that's interesting too, because that estimate, I think, is 500,000 to 600,000. I can't remember. But you know, the LHOQ has sold at auction for already $1 million. So that price is going down too.
But of what year?
When that edition was made. I can't remember what year they made the edition, but you know, it's his replica of the one, but there are only 35 of them.
35?
Yeah.
So it's okay, but what years approximately?
Oh, like in the 60s. I have it somewhere written down.
Okay. You can tell me after. And where is when is
it's at Christie's, New York.
When?
Just in 2 weeks, I think, before my auction.
Ah, wow, that's interesting.
Yeah, you just Google Christie, but they have 10 things by Duchamp coming up. I can tell you, maybe I shouldn't say this, but I negotiated with Christie's to sell my collection for 6 months before I went to Phillips. They agreed on all the prices for my Duchamp items, but they did not agree on the works in the after Duchamp because Christie's only wanted to sell works by artists who already had an auction record. But Phillips was willing to take a chance and go with artists who didn't have that auction record, which clients seem to depend on in order to bid. But I think Phillips has a younger audience.
That's for sure.
They're appealing to a far younger crowd of people. I know from the videos that accompany. I mean, Christie's would never do anything like that, like the videos that they put up. So I think they have a more conservative base. And in the end, they just simply didn't want to sell some of the works that I had because the artists were not sufficiently well known.
Okay. And
so those works that they are selling were meant to be in my sale, but now they're selling them on their own.
So what about Nu descendant un escalier?
The pochoir. Yeah. Interestingly enough, I've seen this now in 2 or 3 different places. They keep saying people do not know how many Duchamp made of that. But I'm fairly certain I know the number because he had to have made 300 for the boîte à valise, right? Because it's an edition of 300. But in a letter that he writes to Julian Levy, he sends him 300 more to be sold for $1 each.
Wow.
To raise money to make the valise. Julian Levy probably sold a handful of them. I can't imagine how many he sold, but unfortunately he had a flood at his farm and the majority were destroyed. So we don't know exactly how many. We know that when his sale came up in Paris, I think in 2005, you know about that sale, the Julian Levy sale?
Yes, yes, at Duchamp.
Yeah, it was,
Duchamp auction.
Yeah. Altogether, I think about 6 or 7, both of the bride and of the Nu Descending were in that sale. So we know there's at least that number.
But that's a catalogue raisonné by Arturo Schwartz.
Yes, and but these were unnumbered. So in the first edition of his catalogue raisonné, by the way, I have all the editions. The one from 1969 says, and he puts it in at the end. He didn't know it existed. It comes in the addenda at the end. And he writes in his catalog, these works are very rare. Of course, he says that because he didn't know about them before it was brought to his attention. Both the Nu Descending and the Bride, both done by Pochoir. You know that I wrote a book on Duchamp in mechanical reproduction, which actually was translated into French. L'art de faire de l'art. Anyway, it exists in French. But my whole book was based on that Pochoir because I was in Paris once buying, every time I go to Paris, I buy what you cannot buy in a pharmacy in America, those pills, sleeping pills. You sell over the counter the strongest sleeping pills that exist anywhere. You take one of those pills and you're out for good for 8 hours. They're those tiny, tiny little pills. So I'm waiting in line.
Donormil.
Yes. Anyway, as I'm waiting in line, I see a man reach over and sign on a postage stamp. And I said, what are you doing? And he said, I'm signing because he's a notary. I said, wait, this is how you notarize things? He said, yeah, you sign over a postage stamp to avoid forgery. And I thought, oh my God, that's what Duchamp did on the Nu Descending at the bottom of the stamp. And remember, his father was a notary.
Yes.
And then he also said in an interview, he loved his father so much that before he decided to become an artist, he thought about becoming a notary. And if you think about Duchamp, what is his signature? It transforms a shovel from a hardware store into a work of art. So basically, you could say, since you're involved in the economy of art, that it goes from $39 to a minimum of $2 million with his signature. That's a remarkable thing. And notaries in France, I understood later, it made a lot of money because they did land transactions and got a percentage of land
Yes.
transactions. So they made a lot of money. But it doesn't work, I know now, today. Notaries in France are very much like notaries now. They're really verifying your signature. But it's rather interesting that a father whose job was to verify a signature, his son then becomes famous for his signature.
Very interesting.
It cannot
Super
be a
interesting.
coincidence.
You're
So
right.
my entire book is based on that one observation.
And you have a project of another book about Maria Martins, right?
Yes, actually, it's right here.
I would love to read it. I'm in love with their love story because I read some love letters from Marcel Duchamp to her, and it's extraordinary.
Well, it's kind of interesting that this comes up now because the book I have a book launch tomorrow night at Rizzoli's, and it was just now reviewed. It was mentioned in the New York Times and reviewed by the Brooklyn Rail. I don't know what will happen with it because I even got a film director from Brazil who wants to buy an option of the book.
Wow.
And because he's Brazilian and his name is Bruno Barreto. He has done many films. You're too young to know one film that I know called Donna Floor and Her Two Husbands.
I read the book. I love the book.
Okay. Well, and the other great film is called Reaching for the Moon. That is a truly great film that he did more recently. But anyway, he wants to do this as a film. So
Wow.
I told him, there's a problem maybe with part of the film because the end result of this love affair is a 20-year obsession with a woman who fully exposes herself to the world. How do you show that? He says, oh, don't worry about it. This is exactly what I do. So don't think about it.
There was a documentary in Brazil a few years ago, like 10 years ago, which was
yes, I was in it. I'm in that documentary. I'm interviewed for it.
Yeah. It was very good. But let's go back to Nu descendant un escalier and the value of it.
Well, it's kind of interesting that I found a group of those that I purchased, a small group, but I put one at auction about 10 years ago, and it sold in Paris for $204,000. But then because I had others, I never put another one at auction, but they were sold. But when you sell them to people, you never know who you sell them to, and some put them back up at auction because I thought they were getting them cheaper from me. And the interesting thing is that first price of $204,000 never was achieved again because the prices go down when people discover there are more than one of anything. So the prices have fluctuated. It sold a couple of times for in the 100,000s and sometimes a little bit lower. So this pochoir is actually, I don't have any more. So this ends up being the last one. So I don't know. I don't know what will happen when it goes up. People rely, when they buy things, almost exclusively on previous auction records, which is kind of interesting because the mistake with that is when people own things, if you own it yourself, all they want to talk about is the highest amount something sold for in the past, not the real estimate of its value. Because you can't stop two people from fighting each other to buy something if they have a lot of money. So you end up getting a sort of artificial value. And that in itself can have a negative effect because then in the future people say, okay, that's out of my price range. I'm finished. That is a kind of negative effect of what you would think is a positive result.
Well, merci beaucoup. Thanks a lot.
All right.